Elora had built her world out of ink and paper, believing a story's true magic was its ability to rewrite a cruel ending. Her shame, the quiet, constant ache of being wolfless and barren, was the only armor she wore. She clung to the foolish hope that someday, her empty womb would quicken, and the shame of her supposed defect would transform into joy. That fragile hope was shattered the second Beta Varden, King Kaelin's enormous enforcer, darkened the cottage doorway. His shadow felt like the crushing weight of the Alpha King's absolute, cold authority. Thomas, Elora's father, shook violently, clutching Lyra, the fertile, favored sister, close to his chest. "The tribute is doubled," Varden announced, his voice a low, gravelly threat. Thomas's eyes darted from the few coins they possessed to Elora. He needed a price. Desperation turned to brutal calculation as his finger pointed. "Take her," Thomas choked out, shoving his eldest daughter forward. "Elora is useless for breeding. A slave is all she is fit for. Let this satisfy the debt." Elora didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She watched her father's act of monstrous weakness, the final, undeniable proof that her own blood saw her as disposable. The massive hand of the Beta clamped down on her arm, dragging her away from the only home she had known. Her father's last word, "useless," echoed the village's judgment. As Beta Varden hauled her toward the looming, dark silhouette of King Kaelin's castle, Elora closed her eyes. Her fairy tales were lies. Tonight, she would only tell herself one bitter, honest truth. She was heading to the place where slaves went to disappear forever. The journey to King Kaelin's stronghold was a blur of fear and pain. Beta Varden, the king's enforcer, did not spare the new slave, dragging Elora across the rough stone roads. When they finally arrived, the castle was a brutal, sprawling monument to power, its black iron gates guarded by massive, silent wolves. Elora was stripped of her worn clothes, scrubbed clean by silent, grim servants, and dressed in a simple, gray linen shift, the uniform of a disposable ward. A final maid straightened her hair, her eyes filled with pity and terror, a look Elora had become grimly accustomed to. She was led to the throne room, a cavernous space where shadows clung to the high ceilings like old regrets. There, seated on a throne carved from obsidian and bone, was the man who owned her life, King Kaelin. He was enormous even sitting, his shoulders vast and his presence radiating a cold, magnetic force that silenced Elora's breath. His features were striking but hardened, a royal mask that promised nothing but cruelty. He looked at her with the detached curiosity a man might reserve for livestock. Elora forced herself to meet his gaze, a flicker of defiance from her battered soul. Kaelin's lips barely moved. He asked no questions about her father, or her worth. He simply looked her over, from the tips of her clean fingers to the terror in her eyes, before turning his gaze to Beta Varden. "She is to serve the guest," Kaelin commanded, his voice deep and emotionless. He paused, his sharp gaze finally boring into Elora, noting the faint tremor in her stance and the resilience fighting the fear in her expression. A chilling smile touched the edge of his mouth. "She has the eyes of a dreamer. She will do for my guest." Elora was shoved through a heavy iron door and into a chamber swallowed by darkness. The air was cold and heavy, thick with the scent of old leather and something wild, something distinctly predatory. A low growl vibrated through the stone floor, making her knees lock. The king's guest was not human. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him, the beast. He was colossal, defined by thick, dark fur and muscles that shifted like tectonic plates beneath his skin. Scars crisscrossed his face, and his eyes glowed with a feral intensity. He was terrifying, a nightmare come to life. "Are you afraid, little human?" the beast rumbled, his voice a deep, hollow echo in the dark. Elora's survival instinct, born from years of enduring her family's contempt, took over. She lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in concentration. She didn't have strength or a wolf, she only had her mind. She began to speak, her voice trembling but steady, weaving a desperate tale. Once, in a kingdom of ice and thorns, there lived a magnificent prince who was cursed by a jealous witch. She told him of betrayal, of transformation, and of the single condition for breaking the dark enchantment. When she finished, the beast was silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then, to her shock, he stepped closer. "Marry me," he commanded, his proposal sounding like a death sentence. Elora needed a weapon, a defense that wasn't a story but a shield. "I am held by those who cannot touch me," Elora whispered, looking up at the terrifying creature. "I am broken when I am given away. What am I?" She offered the riddle like a bargain. The beast tilted his head, intrigued. He didn't know the answer. The tension eased. She had bought her life for one night more. The first light of dawn brought not relief, but a new kind of dread. Elora was taken from the beast's chamber and almost immediately summoned back to the throne room. King Kaelin was there, looking just as formidable and cold as the day before, if slightly more alert. He waved a dismissive hand, sending the attending Beta Varden to the far corner of the room. The king questioned her, his voice low and dangerous, demanding to know the guest's habits, his moods, and his demands. He was meticulous, clinical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Elora, still running on the high-wire tension of the previous night, spoke of the beast's loneliness, his unexpected intelligence, and the deep sadness in his cursed eyes. She argued with quiet, desperate conviction that even the fiercest animal was defined by its soul, not its scars. Kaelin watched her, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps curiosity, perhaps anger, in his stern expression. He was intrigued by her defiance, by her refusal to simply confirm his cruel reputation. He finally stood, his gaze freezing Elora in place. "You have seen things here that no one outside these walls may ever know," he stated, the power in his voice heavy enough to crack stone. "Your slave property, Elora. Remember your place." He stepped close, forcing her to look up at his intimidating height. "If you ever breathe a single word of my guest's presence, nature, or character to anyone in this kingdom, you will not survive the hour. You will be executed by morning." The threat was not a warning, it was a promise. Elora swallowed hard, the taste of fear metallic on her tongue. Her survival, she realized, depended entirely on her silence. Weeks turned into a peculiar routine. By day, Elora was a quiet ghost in the castle, avoiding the notice of Beta Varden and the cold scrutiny of King Kaelin. By night, she was the storyteller of the Dark Chamber. Her desperate inventory of old tales ran dry, forcing her to invent new worlds, new characters, and new riddles, each one stretching her life by 24 hours. Yet, in this creative desperation, something shifted. The beast was not just listening, he was responding, challenging her plots, questioning her themes. He saw her mind, a privilege no one had ever granted her. Elora began to speak honestly, pouring her deepest shame into the fictional lives of her characters. One night, a story about a woman cast out for her broken body led her to confess her own history, her wolflessness, her infertility, the bitter moment her mate rejected her. The chamber, usually a place of terror, became a confessional. She spoke of her deep-seated belief that she was worthless. The beast listened without judgment. His reaction wasn't pity, but a sudden, protective heat. He rose, immense and intimidating, yet his eyes held a new, gentle light. He turned and pressed a hidden panel in the wall. It slid open to reveal a magnificent, small room, a personal study filled floor to ceiling with scrolls and books. It was a secret library. "You waste your genius telling tales to save your life," the beast rumbled, his voice soft with reverence. "Your mind is more valuable than any child, Elora. Create worlds here. It was the first time anyone had ever affirmed her value, and it came from a monster. Elora spent the day in a dizzying state of acceptance. She no longer needed stories. The beast had given her the unconditional love she craved, and she finally found the courage to embrace a love that was terrifyingly real. That night, she would tell him the answer to the riddle, tell him that his love was the promise that had broken when her family betrayed her. She would tell him, yes, she would be his. She waited until the deepest hour of the night, slipping into the dark chamber before dawn could touch the windows. She found the beast asleep, curled into his massive shape. She knelt beside him, reaching out to stroke his thick fur. It was then she noticed the faintest hint of golden light bleeding from the horizon. The sun was coming. Suddenly, the beast groaned, his body seizing in a violent, painful tremor. The fur began to recede, the massive limbs shrinking, the terrifying snout melting back into human form. Elora watched horrified as the beast dissolved into King Kaelin. Kaelin woke as the golden light touched his skin, his cold eyes snapping open to see Elora staring down at him. Recognition dawned on his face, quickly replaced by a profound horror that eclipsed the terror of his curse. "You know," he whispered, his voice ravaged by grief. He threw a silk sheet over his nude body. He revealed the true curse. The magic demanded a pure love for the beast, untainted by the knowledge of the king's identity. Her seeing him now, knowing the monster and the man were one, had tainted their love. "It's ruined," he declared, his voice cold and final. He stood, towering over her. "You must leave. Go, Elora, before my failure kills us both." He banished her, believing her discovery had destroyed his only chance at salvation. 1 year passed since King Kaelin had cast her out. Elora had spent the time in quiet exile, far from the castle, determined to rebuild herself without the crutch of stories or the validation of a monster's love. But when rumors of the king's impending wedding reached her, a political union with the beautiful Princess Elora of the Southern Lands, a fierce, protective need dragged her back. She had to see him one last time, to ensure the man she loved, the soul she had saved, was truly gone. Elora secured a place amongst the spectators in the grand cathedral. The wedding was a spectacle of wealth and power, but the man at the altar, King Kaelin, was a stranger. His posture was rigid, his handsome face frozen in a mask of regal indifference. His eyes, the cold, striking gray she had first met in the throne room, were utterly dead, a king without the heart of his beast. He was marrying an elegant woman, but he was alone. As the king and Princess Elora began their final vows, a flash of movement high in the rafters caught Elora's eye. A lone archer, hidden in shadow, drew a bow, the arrowhead glinting menacingly. Terror, sharp and primal, pierced through Elora's resignation. This was not about love or marriage. This was assassination. Without thought, Elora surged forward, a final, desperate act of devotion. A split second before the bowstring snapped, she threw her frail body directly into the path of the arrow, saving the king's life with her own. The impact ripped through her, and she fell, the world blurring into a single, agonizing smear of color and pain. The world dissolved into a ringing silence around Elora. She lay on the cold stone, the arrow's head burning deep in her side, staring up at the horrified, beautiful face of King Kaelin. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unable to touch the blood blooming across her linen shift. The scent of her life force, of her sacrifice, seemed to ignite a wild, desperate tremor in his body. The setting sun, a violent splash of crimson outside the cathedral windows, signaled the hour of transformation. Beta Varden rushed forward, pulling the king by his arm. "Your Majesty, retreat. The change is coming. You cannot risk your secret," he hissed. Kaelin threw off his Beta's grip, his gaze locked on Elora's fading face. Just then, The assassin, seeing his first plan fail, leaped from the rafters, knife drawn, aimed at Elora's exposed throat to finish the job. Kaelin let out a sound that was half scream, half roar. He chose. He rejected his shame, his pride, and his royal secret. Kaelin's body convulsed violently, the curse taking hold publicly, skin tearing, bone cracking, fur exploding outwards. He roared as the beast, a sound that shattered the cathedral's stained glass and terrified the assembly into silent flight. The beast surged forward, intercepting the assassin and saving Elora's life. As the beast cradled her gently, his monstrous form radiating fierce love, Elora knew the truth. He had chosen her life over his secret. The curse was broken. With her last, rattling breath, she whispered the answer to the riddle, a word that now held sacred meaning, a promise. Then she collapsed in his monstrous arms as a brilliant, blinding light enveloped them both, signaling the final transformation. 1 year after the wedding, the cathedral had been rebuilt, but the kingdom was transformed far more profoundly than stone and glass. A new era had begun, ruled not by fear, but by a sovereign love. King Kaelin, no longer cursed, ruled with the strength of a wolf and the compassion of a man who had known true loneliness. By his side sat Queen Elora, her gaze now steady, her intelligence applied not to desperate tales, but to reforming the harsh taxes and laws that had once governed their lives. One quiet afternoon in the rebuilt library, Kaelin traced the thin, silver scar left by the arrow on Elora's side. He confessed his deepest secret. He had known the answer to her riddle all along. "A promise is broken when it is given away," he murmured, his voice husky. "But I waited. I needed you to choose me, to choose the beast freely, without the promise of a king." Elora smiled, her love complete. Yet, the final, most personal transformation was revealed a few months later. The break of the curse had healed her deepest flaw. The woman called barren was with child. 9 months later, the kingdom celebrated the birth of their healthy, royal twins. Elora held her daughter, then her son, realizing the true meaning of the magic that had saved her life. She was not just a queen, she was a mother, her barrenness transformed into a legacy, proving that love, true and unconditional, was the greatest power of all.